Sort of.
Yay! There we
We're
go.
back. We're moving.
We're live.
We're live. Just ended with John, and now people are coming in over here. And
Yeah,
look at
what
this.
an amazing hour spent with John. It's always a great time. Like, you always learn something new. And if it was your first time with him, then it's just like mind-blowing.
I agree. That was, and Matt said it earlier when we met him like 5-6 years ago now. I had the opportunity to meet him, and I was just like, why am I working so hard when I can just kind of reuse these things and change one number or change one stat? And oh my gosh, it's so much fun. All right, everybody, we're starting this. We're 45 seconds in, and we're still talking about the last guy. But now we've got Terra with us. So I want to welcome everybody to EdTech in the Bend. My name is Seth Ponder. I'm a Project Lead the Way teacher here in South Bend Riley High School in the northern part of the state. I want to first thank our biggest sponsor, and actually the three of our employer, South Bend Community School Corporation, for always giving us the thumbs up and the support that we need to help our students. But I think like this week is more about like helping each other, and then it goes down the slide to our students. So thank you so much, South Bend Schools. And now I'm going to swing it over, that way, to Allison.
Oh, this way. There we go. My name is Allison Schlofeld. I'm the coordinator of digital integration for South Bend Community Schools, and super blessed to be a part of this EdTech in the Bend team. I am so excited to welcome one of my partners in crime, who's like literally right back here in this room presenting. Terra Cowham. She's going to talk about vocabulary strategies. And as you listen to Terra, please share using the hashtag ETITV20 on all your social media. All you, Terra.
Thanks. Quick question for my tech stuff. If I want to share my screen.
There it is.
Thank you for pulling that one up. Thanks. Okay, well, thanks everybody. I just wanted to say, like Allison said, my name is Terra Cowham. I am a former world language teacher. I was in teaching world language for about 9 years. And then I moved into a digital integration specialist position. And now I am one of the coordinators of virtual student and professional learning with South Bend Schools. I wanted to say thank you so much for being here. For those of you who just left that session with John, so energizing and invigorating. And he just really makes us think about why we are working or why we should stop working harder and teach better, right? So thank you again for taking this time out of the last few weeks of your summer to focus on your own growth and your own learning so that we can take all of this to our students and help that next school year, the very strange school year that is going to be an even better experience for our students. So today, we are focusing on vocabulary strategies. As a former world language teacher, vocabulary learning was crucial for our students to be able to communicate in any way and to do any of the tasks that we asked them to do. But more than just if you were in a language classroom, so more than just, your English language arts, every single content area has vocabulary that they have to learn, that students need to internalize, and they can't just memorize it for a test. They need to actually understand what that vocabulary means so that they continue building and really accessing that content. So we're going to start today with talking about what we know about vocabulary. And we know, again, it's a crucial role in any content area, but we also know that research shows us that students are just not learning from writing down the words in a list or memorizing the definitions. Instead, what students need when they are trying to really internalize and bring this vocabulary from their short-term memory into that working and long-term memory is that they need to see and hear and use these new words for them in meaningful ways. They need to construct meaning, and they have to have it in context. So what we can do through different strategies is help them with that definition, that recall learning that they have to first start at as their foundation, but then we'll be able to free up that additional time so that they can start engaging with these words and doing things with them in those meaningful contexts and some of that deeper, more cognitively complex tasks that we would like them to do. Also, we all know that it doesn't matter who your student is. At one point or another, everybody is going to need support. And so as we build these vocabulary tasks and we think about the strategies, we always have to keep that layer of scaffolding and that layer of support in there for any student at any time. So that's what we know, and we know that teaching vocabulary can take all kinds of forms. But what we don't know, and excuse the Frozen 2 reference, but as we go into the unknown, we had a little taste of it in March, but we don't exactly know what next year is going to truly look like. And so as we think about adapting our strategies and our best practice, we have to now think about doing that in a blended environment. We don't know exactly where our students are going to be at any given time, and we have to make sure that we're creating that space. So, when we adapt these strategies virtually, these are things that can be done whether we are still face-to-face or when we actually get to come back to being face-to-face in a normal, what we know is normal environment. But also then, if you are a teacher who is teaching 100% virtually, because what happens in our classrooms is not the same as what happens in the digital realm. So some of these things, right, we need to make sure that we're creating an established and organized routine. Just like John had said, but when you are using strategies that your students know and they don't have to focus on what that tool or what that strategy is, instead they already know what to do with it, then they're focusing on the content. And also we need them to make sure that they are feeling less stressed and safe and that they understand what is going to be asked of them and what that routine looks like. Because if for some reason they fall out of routine, then they're going to be able to jump right back in as soon as they can. And then allowing through edtech and other tools, we're allowing those students to catch up and jump in because everything that we're doing is available to them virtually. The other thing about vocabulary, then when we think about our best practice, is how are we going to make space for collaboration? If students are constructing meaning and students need to work together, how can they do that in a digital world? And then, of course, the most important thing to learning is lowering that effective filter, reducing the amount of clicks and the amount of platforms that you're going to be using. So what I want to show you guys today is a lot of things that can be done with the same platforms. And that way, those students that you have in those platforms are reused time and time again, and they're not relearning something or learning something new, I should say. And then also to make it fun and engaging. If you are not having your students laugh and have high energy and they don't want to come to class, then they're not going to be as present. And then that presence is what keeps them engaged in learning. So before I just start talking about all this other stuff, let's just start looking at these strategies and let's create something. I'm going to start with one of the strategies that really revolutionized my class. In 2018, I discovered the Fast and the Curious protocol. And I know that, we have listened to John Krippos explain this, but I will say, for those of you who maybe were not part of that session, this protocol, hands down, was one of the greatest things to transform my classroom and to get my students engaged. So the way that it works, and I won't go into great detail, but you give the students a set of words. I chose to use quizzes. I did not use any other platform with this. I always use quizzes because quizzes allows you to quickly upload words or lists that you may already have from a Google Sheet. And I had everything in Quizlet for my students previously. So what I did was just then exported the stuff from Quizlet and imported those lists into quizzes. The other reason that I like quizzes so much is that when you're playing a live game, the teacher interface gives you the percentage, the whole class average. It shows you what students are getting the questions correct or incorrect, and it also saves that data for you. So anytime you want to go back and look and see the progress over time, it's housed right there in that platform, and you just need to remember what the quiz name was. So Here's how Fast and Curious works. On Monday, you give the students words. So research says that most of the time our brains can only handle about 5 to 7 new words at a time. So what I would do is give my students about 10 words, and then I would recycle in a few other ones just to kind of make sure that they were still working with those words and they weren't only focusing on the new ones. But then also to give some support to the students who may not be really good at figuring out or understanding the new words, and they just still need to feel supported with those other previous words that they had known. So they take the quiz, they play a game, you cheer them on. You know, I'm kind of a high energy, some people call it hyper teacher. So, you know, there was a lot of yelling and clapping and saying, way to go, guys, this is awesome. Because the goal is that the whole class needs to get a 95% by Thursday. So on Monday, you don't really expect a super high number. Any number that they get is just going to be amazing, in my opinion. So they get done, and then with quizzes, as soon as they're done with the quiz and they're figuring out those words, and remember, this is blind and it's supposed to be blind, and you set them up for this and you tell them, you will not know all the answers to this. Take a guess. You're going to learn them. So quizzes will give you an instant feedback, and you can click through this little slideshow and it tells you what the most missed were or what the most correct words were. And as you go through this with your students and you talk about those strategies with them, oh, why do you think you guys all knew this word? Or maybe what's a way that we could remember the meaning of this word? And you're activating that metacognition for them. You're helping them understand tips and strategies, or perhaps why they knew what they knew and what forms of reasoning did they use to figure that word out. Then they quickly do that session again just to see if that feedback, what stuck. Tuesday, they come in, they do the same thing that you did on Monday, except this time you don't go back through that protocol one more time. You just give them feedback and you move on to a different activity. Wednesday, the same thing, but Thursday is the deciding day. So Thursday, everybody has to get a 95%. If everybody gets a 95%, I spent about 1 minute grading. I created the grade in the grade book. I gave them 10 points and I said, fill all in the whole column, and I was done grading for the vocab. So I did not have any vocab quizzes. Everybody got a grade. Then on Friday, the time that we dedicated to doing this. Now, keep in mind, this takes less than 10 minutes. So as soon as the bell rang, I taught in secondary. As soon as the bell rang, my students would come into the classroom, they would open up that Chromebook and they would log into quizzes and they would wait. They knew and they wanted to play. And so they knew what we were going to do. And they chatted with their friends, and as soon as I started class, I'd throw up the code, they'd jump in, and they would be excited and ready to go, and then their energy was up for the rest of the activities that we were doing that day. So if everybody got the 95%, then on Friday, what you throw in is all of that fun stuff that maybe you don't get time to do, or maybe those extras, some of those standards that you have to squeeze in with other ones. In the world language classroom, this is where I brought in all of that culture, the music and the food and the videos, things that sometimes we just could not infuse in the same way with the curriculum. What I love most about this protocol is the community as well, that it brought to my classroom without me even trying, or the students even trying. So all of a sudden I saw students leaning over and helping each other, and they were, pumping up other students who maybe weren't doing as well or were getting frustrated. And it really created this sense of community and belonging, and this place where making mistakes was okay. So I can't say enough good things about that, but there's so many other strategies that I kind of want to move on. But if you do want to talk about the way that I implemented this in my classroom, feel free to reach out, or of course, reach out to John or Marlena. So talking about multi-purpose tools, using quizzes, I love to use just one quizzing platform. So I know I love Quizlet, but Quizzes was something that I kind of converted over into. And that's because what happened was they started with new question formats. And so while you have your students doing, this 5-10 minute warm-up activity with Eduprotocols, to get that recall and to get that pure definition memorization going, you then can use that same platform that they already know with maybe quizzes that you already have established, and you take it deeper. You deepen the cognitive, complexity basically of what you're asking them to do. So through these new question types with quizzes, instead of just saying, what does this word mean? Right? Now you say, hey, here's an unknown synonym. Poll the students. What do you think that this is a synonym for? Or maybe asking them, give them a concept and say, which of the words would apply? Asking them to, write in how this word connects to a concept or to something that you're learning or to a topic, so that every single time that you are engaging them, they are going deeper and deeper from recall and reproduction into that strategic and extended thinking through application. Another great platform to just kind of focus on vocabulary learning is Pear Flashcard Factory. Now, there will be a session with Alex Milton later in the week about using this, the Flashcard Factory through Pear. So I don't want to take too much time to explain that, because she will be explaining that in greater detail. But what I love about Flashcard Factory is that this works in a remote setting just as well as it works in a live face-to-face classroom. So students are asked to draw a picture and write the definition. And then they're given a series of those cards. And it is up to the teacher or the whole class to decide which of the cards are going to be kept and put into that deck, that flashcard set for the whole class. And so while you could in face-to-face classrooms, when we didn't have to social distance, you could have students work together, they could pair up, they could sit in small groups. Now what you'll need to do is have all of those students be working on their own cards. But where the magic comes in is when you're deciding what one of those cards you are going to keep. So now what we're working with is negotiation and collaboration. And we're talking about those ISTE standards of how are we going to be creators and collaborate in this digital world with giving constructive criticism, right? We have to be careful with our word choices. And the other great thing about Flashcard Factory is that you are providing students with that choice and that voice. So they can choose what it is that they're going to draw, and they are expressing themselves in a creative way. So this is a really fun way to bring in some of that definition learning, and Pear Deck is a great way of giving you some advice for 100% virtual teaching. So if you wanted to read any of those links, there are some things about how to do this digitally. So one of my favorite vocabulary strategies is to create a word wall. But in person, right, there's limiting factors when it comes to a word wall that is literally on your walls. The only time students can access that word wall is when they are in your classroom. And so when I think about my students who have very active lives and they are on their bus or in a car or waiting for practice to start, they didn't have access to that word wall unless they took a picture of it on their phone. So I started making digital word walls for students so that they could access this from their phones or any place that they had a connection to an internet. And when we think about now transforming our classrooms into blended or virtual spaces, creating a digital word wall, is going to allow students to access this information no matter where they are and on virtually any device. So for creating word walls, I highly recommend Google Slides or Jamboards for more of a visual word wall or a dictionary. But there are some pretty amazing things that you can do with Google Sheets. And I think Google Sheets is a powerhouse of all of the Google suites. So if you learn how to manipulate that Google Sheet, there are some really cool things that you can do with digital dictionaries. I do have some links. Below I have some pictures. The one on the far left I created with Jamboard. And then I have a Google slide and then a Google Sheet that are linked for the elementary and secondary templates. So what I would do is I would create this using whichever of the platforms I typically used more. And I would post this on my LMS. And then students, parents, anyone can access this with a simple click. And then there it is. And they can see it and they know what those words are with the definitions that you are giving them. Because of course, we all know that students could just Google a definition, not that hard. But I always wanted students to use our word wall or the vocab list that I would give them because I wanted them to use the definitions that I had thought about and carefully crafted. Sometimes Google definitions or dictionary definitions don't really make sense. So as a teacher, if I can change some of that wording and I can refine that definition as it applies to our classroom and our study and our concepts, then that's going to be more effective for those students. You also can bring in, individual student versions. So if you do a lot of free reading, or if your students, are allowed to have their own personal dictionary, then I would allow them to use a digital format. And then that gives them a lot of their choice and their voice, and then helping them discover what words they need to focus on. So you have these digital word walls, right? So now we've moved that from our classroom walls into the digital space, but we need to do something with it. So, thinking about teaching virtually, it's not about the amount of tasks that you're doing, but it's what it is you're asking students to do. And so sometimes it's easier than posting, 5 things every single day. If you're posting one thing that students are working with for 5 days, then that your LMS, your learning management system, isn't so overwhelming, and students aren't overwhelmed. They know exactly where to go. They know exactly what to do. So as you start working with these digital word walls and the dictionaries, these different activities are going to become more of a habit and a routine. Some of these super fun digital word wall activities would be things like connect to. So what you can do is either choose 2 words from the word wall, or perhaps you choose 2 concepts and the students choose the word within that concept. And then they have to explain the connection between them. And this is where that fun and that creativity comes in. You also can have students take 2 words, maybe they choose or you choose, and they create a sentence. And so they get to be creative and show how, they're thinking, what they're thinking, and how they're combining these and how they're understanding these 2 words. And then to throw in that idea of collaboration, well, then you have the students perhaps write them, on a Google slide, a collaborative Google slide, or maybe a Jamboard. And then you have a peer evaluate that. And you teach them, how do we give effective feedback to our peers? And how do we do that with kindness? And how do we do that constructively? So there's lots of fun things that you can do with digital word walls and digital dictionaries. But again, even when we do go back face to face, please continue to make these digital dictionaries, because I'm telling you right now, those high school students, or maybe even those parents, having access to that word wall will help your students out tremendously. So another thing that I think is important is vocabulary collaboration, also with routine. So creating your own routine with vocabulary so that your students know this is what we do every single day is going to be very effective. So when we think about a blended environment, and we think about maybe kids who won't be in school if we are together, or maybe if you're in a virtual, you're not exactly sure where that student may be and for their who's caring for them. They may not be at home. They may be with someone else. So allowing them to have that routine and jump in where needed is going to be the most important thing. So one of the ways to do that would be then to set up kind of a vocabulary collaboration roadmap. And so day 1, you're having a student create something. So I would say with a Google slide, or maybe a Jamboard, Google Drawings, those are my personal favorites. You are going to have them create the definition, give the part of speech, and find an image. There's lots of ways that you could do this. With Google Slides, you can set up a template and make that template. So you set up the Google slide, and then you would download that slide with the template on it as like a JPEG or a PNG file, as a picture. Then you would upload that as the background of your Google slide presentation, so that when you're sharing it with your students, they can't move anything around. And what they're doing is just adding text boxes on top of that template that you've created. So they start with the basics, right? So we're going to get them with that recall. So what's that definition? They have to learn that definition. They have to know that part of speech. They have to know maybe an image, right? So images are super powerful in any classroom. You know, I think about math class and I think about all the different graphs and slopes of a line. And I was not a strong math student, and we didn't work a lot with images. And I think that had my teacher done that, I may not struggle with math as I struggled. So that's day one. Day two, you give the students time to review those words that were created the day prior. So they're looking at the definitions, the part of speech and the image, and they only created maybe one word, but now they're engaging with all of the words. So after they've reviewed a little bit, you would ask them to add a sentence to a slide. And I would recommend doing this in the notes section where there's a little bit more space. So you could assign them a word, you could have them pick a word. It just kind of depends on who your students are and what kind of structure they need. So they're going to write a sentence and it's going to be related to that topic, the unit, or the concept. The next day, same thing, except now you would have them add a sentence that maybe is everyday use, or maybe how to explain it to someone younger. On that fourth day, right? So now they've reviewed, they've looked at all of them, they've added sentences. Now you're going to ask them open-ended questions. So what I would do is now I would insert these open-ended questions in the slide directly after the slide that contains the definition, part of speech, and image of the word. So they're going to then answer these questions, and everybody could answer these questions. They could put it into the notes section. You could have them do text boxes where then they, throw it on top of that slide, and they're going to then be having to apply their knowledge of what that word means and justify their learning. The last day, probably a Friday, you would then continue on with deepening that cognitive complexity by asking them to do something like an 8 parts Eduprotocol, which asks for a paragraph and a picture, and then they're breaking down the parts of speech. Or if it's a math class, doing the math reps that John Crippo had shown us in his presentation. These are both linked, so we don't have time right now to explore those in this presentation, but I highly recommend that when you do get this presentation to click on those. Another thing that you could do, depending on what class you are teaching, is do a digital refrigerator poetry activity. I love nothing more than my magnetic poetry sets on the side of my refrigerator. And when thinking about how do we process words and how do we find all of those small nuances of meaning and those kind of varying degrees of how we use a word and how the meaning changes, I always think of my magnetic poetry set. And that would be a really fun activity for students to show their creativity and, give them that kind of voice to express themselves. So what you would do is create the magnetic poetry template in a Google Drawing, Jamboard, or a slide, anywhere where the students could drag and basically drop over a text box and have them build sentences. And they wouldn't share on this document. This would be their own document that then they could submit to you and you could share with the class. But they would not be working this collaboratively because it might get a little too messy. But you keep all those words in the gray space and you keep all those text boxes so that they can just drag those and move them over. And, I think about my students who need additional support. So I think about color coding. So if it's a verb, maybe make it red. Like if it's an article, make it green. And for students who, excuse me, maybe for students who are, English language learners, maybe slim down their choices so they have less to choose from. And maybe for your students who might be able to handle more, challenge them to create, a multi-part sentence, a compound sentence, or maybe a whole paragraph.
Tara, before you move on, do you want to answer a couple questions?
I'd love to.
Okay, so the first one is, where would you post your digital vocab wall to your LMS?
I would
where
create
would you
it. So if you're using Google Classroom, I'd create it as a topic. And so if you have a resource topic, or maybe just call it vocabulary, I would post that with a link to the Google slide or whatever platform that you're using. So if you have Canvas, you may have a module that's just different resources, but make sure you set that off, and you want to kind of put that up at the top of the page, especially if parents are going to be helping students. You want to make that very visible and not hidden down in the daily assignments.
The second one is, I only see my students 2 blocks a week. Do you have any tips for modifying fast and curious?
What I love about quizzes is you can do a homework game. And so I forgot to mention this. So what I would do for my students is, when we were playing live, I would limit the view of the leaderboard. So in quizzes, there's a way that you can just show the top 5. I didn't want my students who weren't as successful to be basically broadcasted on the projector on the wall that they weren't doing so well. So I would limit that, and that way only the top 5 were showing. And the students for winning basically was just kind of bragging rights, or like a little feel-good moment. We never made it like a big boastful thing. So what you can do is you can actually run those live games with your students, but I would give them the homework links. I would always have that open so that my students who were maybe not as successful, they could go home and at night, and they could go through this same quiz, but instead of it being a live session, it would be a homework session. And I actually saw some of my students who in class really struggled. They would go home and do that maybe 3-4 times a week because they wanted to improve and they wanted to help bring that class average up. So what I would say is that if you only see your students and you have them in blocks, is do the Fast and Curious as a live game when you're together, but then have them do that homework on the other days, and it still will give you that whole class average. You know, you can figure out what that data says for where they are toward that 95%.
Love that idea. Lastly, do you know if Google Read and Write works with Google Slides?
Oh, I don't know if it does or not. I don't use Read and Write very often, so that is a really great question. If anyone knows, please put it in the chat.
Yeah, and lastly, I know I said that last time. Bradley just wants you to know, Bradley. Yes. Bradley wants you to know that you can insert images in Google Sheets, which might be fun to play with as well.
Yes. So if you go back to Brad, thank you. If you go to this elementary created by the techie teacher, she has created some really cool Google Sheets. Bradley is our resident Google Sheet master. So if anyone needs any help, then they can ask him. But I was always intimidated by Google Sheets until I realized that they just did everything imaginable. Google Sheet can do anything. So if you are interested in kind of the images, or maybe you like the idea of keeping everything into one large document. So if you look at the bottom of this where it says My Digital Word Wall, she has hers created alphabetically for elementary students, but you could do this for secondary students as well. And that way throughout the year, they're adding things alphabetically through the different pages of the Google Sheet. She also added emojis, which I think is a really phenomenal way to support maybe some of your students who aren't as strong linguistically. Maybe they can see the images, maybe that color is what draws them in. But there's a lot of different things that you can do with Google Sheets. So even teaching your students how to use the find feature, where they can type in a word and it will take them to where that word is within the document. And also, of course, adding color helps our brains. And in Google Slides, you can also add audio recording. So you could even have yourself pronouncing these words so that your students can hear what these words sound like, and not from, a Google Translate button or whatever automated voice goes through there. So those are all additional, add-ons that you can do with these digital word walls, virtually, blended, when you're face-to-face, at any given time. And the other thing I like to think about is just, access, right? So the more and more that we can add to this and remove those barriers, the better that our students are going to be when it comes to doing these tasks that require, different depths of knowledge. So they don't have to, they have kind of that support for that recall and that definition that they might need. Are there any other questions?
You're good right now. If there's more, Seth or I will hop in at the end.
Awesome. Okay. So we talked about the Iron Chef protocol, but I highly recommend this one as well. When I say to my students, we're going to do an Iron Chef, they understand what that means. And they know that they're going to get a Google slide and it's going to have big blank spaces and they're going to have to fill that in. So what I love about vocabulary collaboration with the Iron Chef is that students are going to have to be forced to work together and use those comments on a Google slide and figure out whose meme is going to make it into this presentation. The other thing that I like about this protocol when it comes with vocabulary collaboration is that it is fun, it is fast-paced, kids crack up, but then you are dividing that workload and students are able to then only focus on that one word, but then they get all of the other words at that same deep level since their classmates were helping them construct meaning and build it. In a virtual environment, because kids can't stand up and present, what you would do is just hold a live virtual meeting or synchronous meeting and let your students take control of that meeting platform. Let them share the screen, let them have the mic, and let them present. So you sit back and you let your kids take control and they will be presenting and very quickly. So if you give them a 3-minute time frame, then you're done with the whole class. You could even do this with smaller groups if that was easier for you. I know that when we're teaching virtually, the use of smaller groups is really effective. And then you upload those into your LMS, and then now your students have this beyond just a word wall. Now they have this like encyclopedia Britannica of these words. So they have a visual, they have something funny, right? They have these synonyms, they have all these different ways of remembering this. And so when we think about like our retrieval process and we think about brain science, our brains need different mechanisms to bring that information out. So, maybe that image and maybe that really funny GIF is going to help, little Billy remember this word, but maybe Sally needs, those idea of synonyms where she hears a word and then it snaps back that memory of, oh, wait, here's this new word that I learned. So we've talked a little bit about ways that we as teachers are creating these spaces for students to collaborate, to bring out their creativity, to give them some choice and collaborate. But we also can create spaces for students to do their own learning. And I love the idea of reflection logs. And so I used to have my students do reflections in binders and that way, or notebooks. And then that way it was right there in class. They could pick up that binder. They never forgot where it was. And we could look through that. But when we went one-to-one, then that use of the binders in a way was very limiting because I had to read through them when I was in my classroom. So by using reflection logs and kind of this daily progress checker in a digital way, so here you can see I have a picture of a Google form. What happens then is that I can look through what these students are reflecting on and where their learning is going and maybe where they're struggling or maybe where they are feeling so proud of themselves from anywhere. I can check on my phone, I can check from my laptop, I can check from home, and students can do the same thing. So when it comes to vocabulary learning, I realized that my students really sometimes were getting tired of what I chose for them to do. So, Miss, I don't want to do another Quizlet set. And what I changed it up to do was, because Quizlet and quizzes sync so well together, I would have a Quizlet set, a quizzes homework game open, or any other form of review that you maybe choose. I gave my students those two choices. I liked it to limit a little bit. My students were younger typically, so they needed a little bit of some guideposts to exist in. But you could even do this on Duolingo. You could do it with anything that works for your content area. And you just give them time to study and to play and to choose what it is that they want to do. Quizlet has, I think, 5 or 6 different options for students that they can do to practice their vocabulary learning. And then have them complete a reflection log. So this reflection log is going to ask them, what did you do today? How are you feeling with each of these words? So you as the teacher would fill out the words that you're focusing on for that week, right? So your 5 to 7 words, and then you're asking students, do you feel like you've mastered it? Are you still working on it? Where do you need focus? But here's where that kind of deeper thinking comes in. And here's where that metacognition comes in. You have to ask that reflection question. So you say, what was most helpful? Right? What were something that you're struggling with? What are you going to do different? What are you proud of? And they've only spent 10, 15 minutes working on vocabulary, but then they're going to spend that time being very reflective. But also, it doesn't have to be this big, long paragraph. I told my students, you can write briefly. You can be succinct. You can just tell me quickly, this is what I did right, or this is what I think I should improve on, or this is where I'm proud of myself. But you have to be thoughtful about it. So some of those tips would be, to use that Google form. And how cool would it be for that Google form to then send responses to students? So then they could just easily throw this into a folder, but they have their own documentation of their progress. And they can use that almost just like they were writing in a notebook and keeping kind of a log. So I know we're running short on time, so I'm gonna try and just get through a few of these, but storytelling and retelling. I cannot say enough for storytelling. It is one of the most powerful strategies for learning, in my personal opinion, and I don't care what content area you're in, you can do a storytelling activity. It doesn't matter if it's with the kindergartners who are using pictures, or it's with a senior physics class and they are writing a story that involves physics and all of those concepts that are way beyond what I know for math. But what's great about storytelling is that it is a powerful way that will activate that retrieval process. It is asking students to go deep into what they know and figure out and construct that meaning, and how are they going to get us from point A to point B with this story, and weave in these words and these concepts. So some of the, ideas that I would have for this is that don't just tell them to make a story, right? You can't just say, okay, tell me a story using these words. That's very overwhelming. Instead, you could give them some choices. So limit it to say, write a paragraph, or write to someone younger, make a comic, caption something. And you can always then give them that edtech platform. So, I think about with Adobe Spark. Adobe Spark is super fun because they create a visual story and they can throw in videos and it becomes animated. So those students who are watching it, who may not learn as well from just reading, will be able to kind of have that motion and that video. I think about Book Creator. So Book Creator is very simple to use. It's a very clean platform. It does not overwhelm anyone, and they have wonderful layouts, and students can draw, they can insert video, pictures, icons. It's just super fun. But when you think about storytelling, what we're doing is we are allowing for that more authentic use of vocabulary. And it is purposeful. So if you are modeling this for students, then you are providing that vocabulary in that context. And students can see how it is that we can negotiate all these different meanings of these words. Another thing with student agency, of course, if you are not familiar with Flipgrid, please just go check it out. I'm obsessed with Flipgrid. It is one of the most amazing platforms, I think, for all grades, all content levels. Now, I use Flipgrid with my students because in a classroom of 30, it was very hard for students to work and talk one-on-one. So we would allow for students to respond to one another and present using Flipgrid. So when you use this for vocabulary, students are presenting in the platform, but they have the option now they can draw it with the whiteboard feature. They could explain it just verbally. They could show it. Maybe you have students who are really good at acting things out and those are their strengths. Have them act out the words. They can even upload videos into Flipgrid. Maybe they want to do a stop action Lego movie that explains, what irony is. And then when students are responding and you're building that community, they can evaluate it. And they can tell someone, hey, that was really cool. And they're learning about each other, especially because we're not going to be face to face. We have to give these students every single opportunity that we can to meet and get to know each other. They never been in a class together before. And so through Flipgrid, through using student response, they are encouraging each other, they're building community, they're creating that positive class culture, but they're just getting to know each other and they're also having a great time expressing themselves creatively. So I am going to just kind of talk briefly about word sorts and linear arrays. And this goes kind of with the digital dictionaries. But, there are these traditional best practice things. So word sorts is actually a really strong way to get kids to understand the relationship between words. And understanding those relationships is what's going to then help them basically kind of solidify that meaning in their brain, right? They have to understand how to use it more than just memorizing the definition. So things like your linear arrays and your word sorts and understanding where they belong can all be done through Jamboard, Google Drawing, Google Slides. I say that all the time because they're my favorites. And now what we're doing is we're having students drag and drop their words. If you look at the word sort example, they could just, instead of doing it on paper, they could just take that text box, drag it over, and then ask them to explain, ask them to connect, ask them to use it in context. So you're using one activity for multiple days. When we're doing linear arrays and you're finding, how you can get from inaudible to screaming, that would be the same thing. You could set up those templates for them in a Google slide, and students can drag over the words that maybe you have already created in text boxes and sitting in the gray area. Or maybe if your students don't need that kind of support, maybe you give them free reign. And then you look through and you can share it as a class. You can have that great discussion about, oh, look, here are the words that this student chose. And wow, isn't this a great connection? And letting them speak and letting them explain what it is that they know and how it is that they know it. I'm gonna stop here, but so, a few of our takeaways is just, I hope that as we move into this new kind of realm of teaching, that we are always thinking about, our instruction in purposeful ways, and that bringing in that student agency, metacognition, is going to be the most powerful tool that we have. And of course, making sure that we are allowing our tools to not overwhelm, but to let our students expand their wings and fly a little bit higher. and that we're providing spaces for, no matter what the situation is, that our students are going to be able to access what it is that we would like them to do, and that we are able to adapt with them. So I thank you all. I don't know if there's any questions, but I'm going to kind of leave it there. I'm not sure if Seth or Allison are in.
We are, yeah. So Seth's eating a popsicle, and he just like randomly throws you back in here, and you have no idea it's coming.
I wasn't sure. I thought I'd ask, and then I was like, no, it'll be more fun if I just throw her back in.
Did you want me to say hello? Hello? Was anyone there?
Yeah.
My roommate, student, and son, I guess. I don't know. They're everywhere. I just got a popsicle for a job well done today, apparently.
Nice.
So
awesome presentation.
If I could throw this through the screen, I'd get you a popsicle too.
I can never eat those because they always cut the sides of your mouth.
Well, then you'll have to go to Bonnie Doon's later to celebrate.
I will.
I hear there's a principal up at Clay High School that buys people Bonnie Doon's. I mean,
Diet Mountain Dew. He'll get you some. If anyone wants some Diet Mountain Dew, go to Clay High School. Just go ahead and Google it.
He's gonna be so. That's good. So the only question we're getting is the link to these slides, which we do have. We're gonna post them below in the YouTube. This, along with all of our other recordings from the day, will be up for a couple more weeks on YouTube and Facebook. We have a great rest of the week planned.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna
go for it.
Okay. And all of the links that people are sharing, whether it's their slides or just helpful hints, we're taking notes as fast as we can to then put them in future emails for all of our registered guests, all of our registered attendees. And
tell your friends to register. There's still time.
There's always still time. Registration. And like, we're all numbers people here, but we are at 698 registered. I mean, if just 2 more people would do it, that would be super dope right now. And so we would just end the day beautifully. I also want to, I got to throw these banners up here. So let's see, PGPs right there. So don't forget, if you are need your professional growth points, the link is in the description, or you can use that bit.ly that's running across the screen right now. So today was full of a whole bunch of Eduprotocols. And then tomorrow, our theme is social and emotional learning. We've got speakers from east to west again today. So we're starting with Ken Shelton out in LA. And then we have Kim Clark, Ben DeMonkis, Jonathan Redecker, Terra Klein ending the day.
We got a bonus session for you tomorrow with Benny. Bring your cookies. He really likes cookies.
Yeah, we're going to have lunch with Ben DeMonkis.
Yes, it's going to be great.
So let's jump in, I guess. Any questions? A whole bunch of just great job.
Oh, thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Awesome job.
Yeah, Tara, your willingness to plan, organize, and present for all of us is admirable. Thank you for blessing us with your knowledge.
Oh, that's so sweet.
That's not from Allison. That's
but I really do mean that. I know Don Crippo offers free lifetime tech support. I offer free lifetime vocabulary support because it is a true passion of mine. If I have to see one more kid with earbuds in, writing lists, and not even copying the definitions down correctly, it's just going to break that little last piece of my heart that can't take it.
Awesome. So we just want to say thanks again to Tara for her presentation and for all of you attending. Again, everything will be recorded and left on YouTube and Facebook. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll see you back here tomorrow morning at 10. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Tara.
Bye.